This story was sent by a subscriber. Thank you very much, John. He mentioned that he had been driving trucks for over 15 years, and that what happened to them one stormy night made them question everything they thought they knew about the road. Before listening to his story, I remind you that if you have any error story to tell me, you can send it to me at the email in the description of this channel, and I will tell it to everyone. Thank you. It was just after midnight, and the rain was coming down in sheets so thick, my wipers could barely keep up. I was on Route 17, cutting through the middle of nowhere in northern Georgia, and the storm was the kind that makes you feel like the entire world is drowning. The highway was practically deserted. No other truckers, no cars, just my rig and miles of slick dark asphalt. I should have pulled over, I knew that, but I had a tight delivery schedule and figured I'd push through. The rain was relentless, pounding against the windshield so hard I thought it might crack. Visibility was down to almost nothing. Even my high beams were swallowed by the storm, illuminating only the endless curtain of water. My GPS had gone haywire a few miles back, blinking in and out like it couldn't decide which way to send me, and the road signs were impossible to read in the downpour. But I knew this route well enough, and I figured if I just kept my eyes straight ahead, I'd make it to the next truck stop. It was around then that things started getting weird. I was gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white, trying to keep the rig steady against the wind, when I saw it. A figure on the side of the road. Just a flash of movement at first, out of the corner of my eye. I blinked, convinced I was imagining things. Who in their right mind would be out in this storm, on foot, in the middle of nowhere? But as I passed, I saw them clearly. It was a man, soaked to the bone, standing just off the shoulder, barely visible in the rain. He was waving his arms, like he needed help. I couldn't make out much. His clothes were dark, and his face was obscured by the rain, but I saw enough to know he was desperate. His posture, the way he was reaching out toward the road, something was wrong. I felt my stomach twist. Stopping in the middle of a storm like this was a bad idea, but leaving someone out there didn't sit right with me either. I slowed down, planning to pull over up ahead, just long enough to figure out what was going on. But as I did, I checked my mirrors, and the guy was gone. Just like that, no one there. I scanned the road behind me, thinking maybe he'd stepped back into the trees or crouched down to avoid the rain, but there was nothing. Just the endless stretch of highway and the rain beating against my truck. I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired. Driving in weather like that can mess with your mind. I picked up speed again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. About 10 minutes later, just as I was starting to relax, I saw him again. Same spot, same side of the road, waving his arms like he was trying to flag me down. Only this time, he was closer to the pavement, almost standing in the road. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. There was no way I could have looped around in a circle, and yet here he was, exact same spot. I swerved slightly, avoiding him at the last second. I glanced in my side mirror as I passed, expecting to see him stumbling back into the ditch from the force of the wind and rain. But when I looked, nothing. No one was there. Just the rain slapping against the empty highway. My skin prickled, and a cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I kept driving, my hands shaking on the wheel. Every nerve in my body was telling me to stop, but I couldn't. It was like something was pushing me forward, refusing to let me turn back. The rain hammered the roof of the cab, and the wind howled through the trees lining the road, making it feel like I was being swallowed whole by the storm. That's when the radio started acting up. It was just static at first, faint, but enough to make me notice. I hadn't been listening to anything, too focused on the road, but suddenly, through the white noise, I heard a voice. It was so low I couldn't make out the words at first, but the tone sent a chill down my spine. A man's voice, barely audible, like it was fighting to cut through the static. I reached for the dial to turn it off, but the voice got louder, clearer. It was saying something, no, pleading for something. Help, please help me. Over and over again, the same words, like a broken record. I ripped the radio's power cord out of the dash, but the voice didn't stop. The cab filled with this eerie, echoing plea, like the man was sitting right next to me, whispering in my ear. I gripped the steering wheel harder, eyes glued to the road, trying to ignore the voice. And then, without warning, my headlights flickered. Just once, but enough to plunge the highway into darkness for a split second. My heart leapt into my throat, and that's when I saw him again. Standing directly in front of me, in the middle of the road this time, drenched and waving frantically. There was no way I could stop in time. I slammed the brakes, the tires screeching on the wet pavement, the truck fishtailing as I fought to regain control. I braced for impact, for the sickening thud of hitting the man head-on. But it never came. The truck skidded to a halt, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I sat there, gasping for air, waiting for the man to appear, maybe crumpled on the hood or lying in the road in front of me. But when I looked, there was nothing. No one. Just the empty highway stretching out in front of me, lit up by my trembling headlights. The rain poured down harder than ever, and my breath fogged the windshield. I was shaking, terrified to get out of the truck, but I couldn't just drive off. I had to make sure no one was hurt. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the door, and stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked me over, and the rain soaked me to the skin in seconds, but I forced myself to move forward, scanning the road. There was nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I hurried back into the cab, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were still trembling as I started the engine again. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew one thing: I needed to get out of there, fast. I floored, driving through the storm for what felt like hours, barely breathing until I finally saw the lights of a truck stop in the distance. I pulled in, parked, and sat there for a long time, just staring out into the rain, trying to make sense of what I had seen. I told myself it was just the storm, the fatigue, maybe even a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew something else was out there on that stretch of Route 17. Something that wasn't human. I haven't driven that route since. And I never will again. This story comes from a subscriber who wishes to remain anonymous. They drive long haul across the Midwest and the South, and one late night, they pulled into a rest stop. What happened next is something they'll never forget. I was running late that night, well past midnight, cruising through a stretch of highway between Indiana and Kentucky. It had been a long day, and I was pushing to get closer to my delivery point, trying to shave off a few hours of the next day's drive. You know how it is, you're exhausted but still pushing forward, hoping to get just a little farther before calling it a night. As the road stretched ahead in a ribbon of darkness, I noticed I was running low on caffeine and patience. My eyes felt heavy, and my mind was drifting. That's when I saw the sign for an upcoming rest stop a couple of miles ahead. Normally, I don't like to stop at those small, off-the-beaten-path rest areas late at night, but something told me I needed to take a break. I figured a quick stop for some air, maybe grab something from the vending machine, and I'd be back on my way. The rest stop was typical for the area. Just a parking lot with a few vending machines, some picnic tables, and a dimly lit bathroom. As I pulled in, I noticed it was completely empty, not another vehicle in sight, and that uneasiness in my gut started to grow. You know that feeling when something's just not quite right, but you can't put your finger on it? Yeah, that. I parked my rig in one of the designated spaces and cut the engine. The silence was thick, no sound, but the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees, the wind, and the faint hum of distant traffic. I grabbed my wallet and stepped down from the cab, making my way toward the vending machines, but as I got closer, I noticed something strange. There was this flickering light near the far end of the rest stop, just beyond the bathrooms, where the lighting didn't quite reach. It was like someone was holding a flashlight, but it was erratic, shaking slightly, as if the person couldn't hold it steady. I paused, unsure of what to do. Should I go check it out? Or should I just mind my own business and get back on the road? As I stood there, I heard what sounded like faint footsteps, soft, slow, coming from the direction of the flickering light. My heart started racing. I told myself it was probably nothing, just someone walking their dog or maybe another driver who had pulled in and I hadn't noticed. But the footsteps grew louder, and suddenly, I saw a figure step into the faint light. It was a woman, disheveled, her clothes torn. She looked like she'd been through hell. Her hair was matted, her face streaked with dirt, and her arms were wrapped around herself like she was freezing, though it was a warm night. I could see the fear in her eyes, wide and darting around like she was expecting someone to jump out at her any second. "Help me," she whispered. It was so quiet, I barely heard it. I froze. Everything in me screamed to get back in the truck and drive away, but something about the way she looked at me, I couldn't just leave her there. "What's going on? Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. She didn't answer right away. She glanced behind her, like she was expecting someone to come out of the shadows. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's going to find me. Please help me." I didn't need to hear anything else. I looked around, scanning the dark edges of the rest stop, but I didn't see anyone. Still, that flickering light from earlier made me uneasy. Without thinking, I grabbed her by the arm, not hard, just enough to guide her, and started leading her back toward my truck. "We need to get out of here," I said, more to myself than to her. I opened the passenger side door and helped her up into the cab. She was shaking so badly, I wasn't sure if she'd be able to climb in, but once she was inside, she collapsed onto the seat, hugging her knees to her chest. I could still hear her whispering under her breath, "He's coming. He's coming." I jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and floored it out of there. I didn't look back until I was back on the highway, speeding away from that dark, empty rest stop. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly they ached, and my eyes kept flicking to the mirrors, expecting to see headlights behind me, but there was nothing. Just the empty road. After a few miles, I finally started to calm down, and that's when I asked her what had happened. She didn't respond at first, just kept staring out the window, her breathing shallow. Then, in a low, shaky voice, she said, "I was with him. We stopped here to use the bathroom, but I didn't want to go with him. He wouldn't let me leave." I didn't press her for more details, but I got the sense that whoever he wasn't someone she knew well, and whatever had gone down at that rest stop wasn't consensual. I offered to take her to the nearest police station or hospital, but she begged me not to. She said she just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. I drove her for another hour, just in case. Finally, we pulled into a truck stop with more lights, more people, someplace that felt safe. I gave her some cash, enough for a bus ticket, and she thanked me quietly before disappearing into the night. To this day, I wonder what happened at that rest stop before I arrived. Who was she running from? What would have happened if I hadn't stopped? I'll never know for sure, but I do know one thing. Sometimes, in the dead of night, on those empty highways, you come across things you can't explain, and sometimes, you get a second chance to save someone from whatever darkness is lurking in the shadows.